Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Today, we're lucky enough to get to speak with Ben Schenkman, the author of My Boss is the Devil. And first and foremost, thank you for submitting your story because it was one of those books where, honestly, I don't even know where to begin with it. It was so easy to get lost in, and at the same time, it felt so philosophical, but it was philosophical in a way that was hidden under the guise of comedy, which for me are some of the most powerful stories. And I think you did that in such a unique way where it really pushes readers like myself to sit there and actually question what's kind of the common train of thought. So it was really, really yeah, like really eye-opening and really catching in that regard. So hats off to you. Plus, I love the cover. I think the red really pops in this.
Thank you very much.
So I wanted to start with, there's so many things that I want to ask about, but getting to the root of things, what pulled me into this immediately was that I used to work in a coffee shop. I was a properly fully trained barista. I make a really mean flat white. I can do latte art and everything. And from the outset, I was like, this guy knows his coffee. So tell me about the coffee to start with, because I hated being a barista, and I really sympathised with Nick. So also, I'll ask later if calling him Nick was deliberate, given the many names that the devil goes by. But start off with coffee. Like, what's your relationship with coffee? I know most writers have quite an intense relationship with caffeine, but why a barista? Why'd you start there?
So yeah, it's funny so the question why a barista? I don't actually know if I have an answer to that question. Like I can tell you all about my relationship with coffee, which is long and complicated, but I don't remember frankly this book. I started the journey of this book many years ago. So the question of why a barista, I think it was actually, you know what? When I started writing this book, I actually had just started liking coffee. I didn't like coffee until I was probably in my early to mid 20s. And I took a red-eye flight to Paris and then a train to Bordeaux with no sleep and was then invited to go like out on the town with a group of business people to which we sat around a little cafe and they went around. It was espresso, 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 espresso. Everyone just ordering. It got to me and I didn't drink coffee, but I hadn't slept in so many hours and was jet lagged to hell. And I just said espresso. And from that point, I apparently liked coffee. Uh, and then getting back to the States after that travel, one of my friends where I was working when I had started writing this book, because like many authors, I started writing a book during some downtime that I had at my corporate job. Uh,
Yeah,
and he was a big coffee guy. So like a lot of what I know and learn about coffee, came from my friend Keith at the time. So yeah,
right.
it's interesting. Also, like I'm neurospicy and have been unintentionally self-medicating with caffeine for pretty much my entire life.
Hey, man.
I've got many friends
Can't can't knock that.
where, yeah, like the first time they've tried stimulants of some kind of went, wow, I feel quite normal. I feel like, is this how people feel most? And that's how they discover they're a little bit spicy in that regard.
hmm
But that's in, what would you usually get from a cafe? What's your usual order nowadays?
So these days, like I can't do dairy for multiple reasons. So
Yeah,
like soy lattes are a pretty standard go-to for me. I do love flat whites, which actually
yeah.
I mean, it's not much of a spoiler. Flat whites do show up in the book. That is the devil's choice of drink is a flat white.
Yeah, I wanted to circle back to that at some point. I thought that was really funny. Maybe it's just a personal thing, but the people who ordered flat whites, in my experience, were a certain kind of person. It's a certain kind of person that orders
I
it.
am very
Oh,
curious what kind of person, Steve.
Go getters, business people,
hmm
people with busy jobs, lawyers, people who want a full. They don't want this much coffee. They don't want a liter of coffee, and they don't want something that's. We used to do really sweet coffees, like the caramel frappes and stuff like that. That was usually students. But the flat white is for the business person who's on the go and doesn't want to be, maybe, I don't want to take this off the rails, doesn't want to be running to the bathroom every 10 minutes with their coffee, I guess. It's a very efficient coffee. It's a very logical coffee. I could talk about coffee for a long time.
This is as
Yeah.
someone who doesn't drink coffee, this is all like news to me. This is really interesting.
Well,
I'm learning a lot in that 'cause I never I'm a very literal reader and a lot of things go over my head. So I never would have put two and two together, like if paying attention about like who was ordering what, you know what I mean?
yeah, flat whites are like 3 shots of espresso and steamed milk. So it's an efficient caffeine delivery system that it's basically how can I make 3 shots of espresso palatable? And it's a flat white.
Yeah, so I really loved that the devil drank flat whites. Speaking of, this is a really good chance for me to segue. So I am a big fan of fictional portrayals of the devil. I love to see the devil portrayed in fiction, especially if it's portrayed well. I thought Lucy, Blue, whatever we want to call him in this regard, was a really good, quite unique, quite original take on the devil. I like the devil when he's more charismatic and charming and stuff, and not just a big red guy with horns. I'd love to know the path that you took, where you got this idea of the devil from, and what it speaks to. Tell me about writing the devil.
Yeah, and I just disclaimer, I came up with this concept of the devil before the series Lucifer existed. So like this isn't my take
Yeah,
on the TV series. Like I I started writing this book like I don't know, 14 years ago at least. So
yeah,
so yeah, my idea for the devil, it was interesting because the last thing that I wanted, so to your point, I love a charismatic devil. I don't like the cigar smoking, like mafia style, like I'm gonna make
yeah,
you a deal, kid, kind of stuff. And so I knew when I came up with this idea that the devil was going to be charismatic because the devil isn't the bad guy.
yeah,
It's funny. I've gotten, I think I've started to get a bit of a reputation for my work in that uh the bad guys usually aren't the bad guys. The bad guys are usually other people and capitalism. Um
yeah,
so yeah,
yeah.
the whole
Yeah,
idea behind Lou, for those who haven't read the book yet, Lou is Lucifer. It's a very modern take on the name. But uh the whole idea behind it was I was in my job that felt very dead end at the time, and I said to myself, what if I got a job offer from the devil? What would I do? But also, like, what if the job offer from the devil, like that wasn't the bad thing? What if the bad thing was happening around me while I was actually experiencing this really cool kind of thing? So
yeah.
it's very much played off as a, is it bad? Is it good? You'll find out. But like, yeah, charismatic devils all the way down. That's the only way I like my portrayals, frankly.
Well, I think going back to that point of like, is it bad? Is it good? Because I think we all grew up with kind of an idea of like devil bad. Um, and I think that's why I really like the comedic elements of the story because it really lets you get into the whole idea of free will from a much more, I want to say like distracted way. Like you're kind of lulled into actually considering what free will means and how that's portrayed. And it's like, well, if you actually think about it, if somebody took away my ability to drink alcohol, sure, I wouldn't have free will, but is that really a net negative? Like it's a really interesting concept because then you can get into the whole, well, that sets the precedent. What if you just keep going? Like it starts with alcohol, but it continues. Like you're right. But at the same time, like I think at least the instances that you showed, he wasn't necessarily taking away anything bad. It wasn't like I'm taking away your ability to drink water. Like so it was really interesting to kind of see that and give it a what do you call it? Like give it a perspective that actually makes you consider rather than just immediately blanket statement devil bad.
Well, yeah, and that's like the early conversation that happens. Like that's why it was as simple as, "Hey, pick up that fork." It's like it's not about the fork. It's about whether you have the choice to do it yourself. And like for some people, like confinement isn't isn't being put in a box. It's having your choices limited. For people who experience incarceration, a lot of it's not about being in the place. It's about having no choices about anything that you do. And so like that's the part of free will that I really wanted to explore was it's not about someone telling you to march around and do X, Y, and Z. It's about the fact that you have the illusion of choice now, and that now there's you can do anything you want until I tell you that you can't, and then that's when free will is no longer there.
And
I think
sorry, Steve, I was gonna say, and I think that was one of the instances in the story where I don't, and obviously it's the first in a trilogy, so it might get in. I assume it gets into it deeper there, but there haven't been necessarily too many instances where I'm blanking on the protagonist's name. I apologize, Nick.
Nick?
Um, there weren't too many instances where Nick wanted to do something. The devil was like, no, you can't. So he still had pretty much his autonomy, his freedom. He just now had more money and a better job.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. So again, full disclosure. So I'm Jewish. I'm not Christian of any stripe. So I definitely felt pretty free to take this as a mythology that I was playing with. And
Mhm.
so I never really understood the concept of like heaven and hell in that way. And so in these books, the idea is if you're a decent person, even if you end up working for the devil, it's just because he wants to add you to his check marks of the souls that he basically gets to count for himself. So yeah, it's interesting. The the other books, and I'm happy to talk about the other books, but I know we're here to talk about the first one. But the others don't necessarily continue a lot of the whole free will angle as much as the what's good and what's evil angle. That's a lot more of the in-depth work.
Yeah. I really like that side of it. I made an interesting note where I went, I can't really, I've had time to think about it now and I can't explain why. Parts of it reminded me a little bit of The Matrix, where the whole idea is that the system is what's trapping you, that free will only matters in so much as you can even make a choice about it if you don't have the means to make that, if you don't even know that there's a choice available. And specifically the scene where he goes to see the oracle or something in the first film, and she's like, "Oh, watch that vase. It breaks it." And she's like, "But would you have broken it if I didn't tell you anything? How much are you in control of what you're doing in the first place?" But we touched on hell there, and hell as mythology is something I've always been fascinated with, whether it's like Old Testament, New Testament hell, Dante's conceptions of hell, going to what's the guy that wrote Paradise Lost, Thomas Milton,
Mhm.
all these kind of things. I'd love to know more about your conception of hell because I really enjoyed it. The idea that like some people do quite well in hell and some people don't do very well at all. Depends on what you did, you know. So tell me a little bit about how you came up with hell in that.
It is a little bit of it's kind of like a take on Dante's Inferno in that in my conception there's levels of hell, and like I refer to it at some point as the basically the decent people that just don't make it into heaven end up on the beaches of hell, in that like it's not bad, it's just hell, that's just where you ended up. But it's kind of built on a lot of other cultures. If you look at like Norse afterlife,
Oh yeah.
the people that don't die in battle don't go to Valhalla. They go to an afterlife that's basically just a different kind of existence.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that I definitely thought about it is that hell has layers, and the the goodish people, there's no reason for them to suffer. They're just gonna kind of be there. I will say the third book does explore a bit more of some of the bad people and what happens with them.
Nice,
But yeah,
nice.
I'd say it's similar to the kind of in Dante's Inferno layers.
Yeah. And speaking of sequels, so I know that there's two more books. I don't know really anything about them apart from kind of their names is like Dueling Shoulder Angel or something. You
Yeah.
know, I've seen them, I've not read them obviously, but I liked that the first book was basically standalone.
Mhm.
Like you could read it and that would be fine. So did you write the first book with the intention of writing sequels, or was that something that came up later?
So I wrote the first one with the intention of it being open to sequels. Uh,
Yeah.
I I didn't have the stories in me at the time. Like when I wrote the draft of the first book, I finished during National Novel Writing Month in
Yeah.
2014.
Yeah.
So like it took a while before I picked it up again to try and like the sequel, the second book, fell out of my brain basically in 2 months in 2023 while I was getting like finishing up publishing the first one. So
Uh,
it's definitely like avalanched after that. But yeah, the first one was written. So all of my books are written that you can read them. So after the first one, you can read the second one and be satisfied. And you don't have to read the third one if you don't want to. But if you read the third one, it builds on the story, but like I don't do the cliffhanger thing. Like this is a series. It's not a trilogy where the first book sets up the second book to culminate with the third book. I honestly don't like books like that because
yeah.
I want a payoff in each book.
Mhm.
Like I don't want to have to like it's like going to a movie that's setting itself up only for the sequel, and that sure some exciting stuff might happen, but not enough happens that doesn't make me mad that this is just the first movie and not
Yeah.
like the second one.
It's like watching Dune 1, expecting, like, just waiting for Dune 2.
Yeah, it's like, wait, this is the end? How is this the end?
And I think,
The
like, the,
Marvel Cinematic Universe has inflicted endless damage upon fiction. Everything has to have post-credit scenes now. No, I really like the lack of a cliffhanger, and I'm
mm,
guilty. I've written a trilogy that is set up like that, and the
oh,
end of the
yeah.
first book is like a big climax. Little stinger, got to tune in for the next one. But it's really
Um,
freeing and like not have to do that and just write stories to stand on their own as they are, like a series, like you said. I really like that about it.
well, I think it makes it a lot less intimidating to get into because you're already touching on heavier subjects and this and that, and it gives the reader more opportunity to sink into it at their own pace. Because yeah, I haven't read the sequel yet, but I know that if and when I do, those are the ones. I know that when I do, it'll be the case of I won't necessarily need to reread the first one the week before I reread this.
Mhm.
I start the second one, and I think that's always nice because we're adults and we're living in a world that's always so busy. We just don't necessarily have the bandwidth to sit down and dedicate 2 weeks to reading a series as much as we would like to.
Mhm.
And I think that's in itself something really telling about the writing style and everything was that it my boss is the devil definitely left me wanting more. And knowing that more exists is a really kind of satisfying end to itself. But yeah, I don't feel rushed, which is also really nice.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's really meant to be that way. Like to that stinger at the end. I don't know how to describe like what I do in that it's like a stinger, but it's like a very tiny needle. It's not like it's not a dagger that I stab people with to say like, "Hey, you got to read the next one." It's like there's some stuff after this. Like if you want it, so like the first book sets up that clearly Nick has made a choice and is going to continue doing that. And then like the next book sets up the next series of things and builds the characters. And I can give you a very brief bit of like what the second and third ones are if you're interested.
Go for
Yeah,
it.
yeah, by
Go
all
for it.
means.
Okay. So the second one's Dueling Shoulder Angels, which again, like I love my covers.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
Um,
beautiful.
So the covers are actually kind of tell the story in that in the first book we had Nick and the devil. And then
Mhm.
in the second book we've got Nick, but then we've also got Amy. So people love Amy. Some people feel like in the first book Amy is a not terrible like not everyone thinks Amy's as three-dimensional as she should be in the first book. And fair criticism, she's a supporting character in the
I
first
like
book.
him.
But she gets much more agency and actually a separate POV in the second book.
Oh, cool.
So
Nice.
we start developing Amy as a more secondary main character. But the second book introduces God. So Nick's made his choice, but now here comes the other side trying to poach him, and then that kind of builds a whole thing there. And it's not the God that you would expect, trust me.
Nice.
And it gets into again, if the devil isn't the bad guy in the first book, does that mean that God is good in the second? And you kind of have to read it to find out. It's also it's also capitalism. Uh, and then the the third book, which is actually of the three, it's the chunkiest. It's not super much longer, but the third
That's a
book
good
is
title.
too many gods in the kitchen. And we get Nick, we get Amy, and we get one other person that I can't mention because it's absolutely a spoiler. But we
Is
also
that the
start,
person's background? Yeah, like
well, no,
the silhouette.
the third person's here, but we also do start branching out of the Abrahamic religions in the third
Nice.
book.
Interesting.
That's brilliant. That answers two questions that I had on my questions, which was in the first one, was it a deliberate choice to kind of leave God absent from the story as the counterpart to the devil? Because I think that worked great. I know that in a lot of mythology, the whole idea of like an absent God or like a silent God is quite important to the whole faith thing anyway. And I thought, God, there's a lot of space there to play with that idea. And then you could branch out into other gods and stuff. Makes me want to read the next two books even more, to be honest, because
We,
that was what I was kind of waiting for at the end. I was like, oh, is that going to be where we go next? But oh, that's really cool. I like that.
I think
yeah,
that that's the thing is that, what is it, 270, 280 pages? There's only so much you can put in there without it being like, because I think like with the idea you've gone down and everything, you can really make some 800 page chonkster. But it's nice to keep it concise and keep it on, what do you call it, on topic, and then each story be its own topic. I think you did a good job with it. Plus, like you said, the covers get me. The covers absolutely get me.
Yeah, it's funny. I have two other new manuscripts that I'm like working on getting over the finish line, and I have like the covers that I'm working on, and no matter how much I like them, they are not these covers. Um, which is like it's a shame, but at the same time it's good because it totally differentiates them because it's not the same series. Uh,
Well, yeah,
but
you know, the visual kind of thing. Yeah,
yeah. So eat and like the two new things that I'm working on are both on like they're each effectively either standalones or series starters. So like I have to differentiate each of them from themselves and the first series. But the second book absolutely the concept of an absentee, you know, it
yeah,
who is was it the Devil's Advocate with Al Pacino?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
who remembers the line that God is an absentee landlord, and that's
yeah.
like that lived rent free in my head from the moment that I saw that movie. And I'd say
Great
like
movie.
that's probably some of the whether or not it's the inspiration, but like I very much buy into the concept of God being kind of absentee. But this addresses some of that in that why that might have been the case and what's happening now, which is how Nick is getting roped into this whole thing. I love the second book, and it interestingly enough, I've had some readers. So I have a couple of pieces of feedback on the second book. Is one, I've heard that it's some people's new favorite Pride Month read because there's a lot of
Nice.
like representation
Mhm.
in the second book. And but also someone actually in their review said that I was helping to heal their religious trauma. So like whatever that's worth, it sounds like that's great. Good. I
Yeah.
Well, sometimes
That's I feel,
sometimes it's just a case of providing an environment where people can ask questions and where
Mhm.
people can feel comfortable, um, exploring that without feeling judged, or it's just creating that kind of space. Because ultimately
Mhm.
that's what it is. I think all religion gives you, well, I can't speak for all religion, I'm not religious. But from my understanding, most religion still gives you an opportunity to question and to think. There's an element of faith to it, sure, but you should still be able to come to your own conclusion. And if you find God, you're finding God on your own, like free will.
I feel like this would be a great opportunity to share. And feel free to edit this out, Ryan, if the answer is no.
I
But
I don't know how to, but
feedback.
yeah. What?
There was
Yeah,
one bit of feedback one of our readers that I think would be great to share. You'll know the one I'm talking about, the one that you sent me.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, we'll keep who it was a
Oh, totally
secret as
anonymous, yeah.
well. But basically, we got feedback from a reader saying that they were hesitant to pick it up just because they're religious and my boss is the devil and you have the horns on the cover, everything like that. But I think having that openness and them going and saying that essentially, they have the right to question, and it was just a really fascinating and interesting read, which I think is always nice because then they wanted to read on. And I think from our perspective, there's nothing more satisfying than having a reader actively reading on into a series because we know that from our perspective, we do introduce all of our stories can be read as a one-off, but we also work hard to make sure that if we are introducing a series, sorry, yeah, jumbled. Um, if we are introducing a series, it can be read as a one-off. But when somebody goes and then proceeds to buy the entire rest of the series, I think it's really telling of the job we're doing, but also the authors that we're working with. And, if somebody from a religious background who was hesitant is then continuing on to read more, I think that that's a really promising sign, and it's really eye-opening to the type of stories that you have written too.
100%. I love hearing that too. Like it's not something that I necessarily expected, though I probably should have, but some books like mine, just based on the cover and the title alone, will get panned by religious people. And it's not
Yeah.
that they even read the book. It's just they see something like that and they basically downvote it immediately to express their displeasure that it exists. So it's very nice to hear that like people who are religious and specifically are of the Christian faiths, that they can look at a book like that and say, you know what, I'm gonna let this challenge my
Yeah.
assumptions. And again, like, Steve, to your point earlier, this is not the devil that, and like, roll credits, the name of the series is The Devil You
The
Know. So
devil you
like,
know.
this is this is not the devil you know. It's definitely going to help people think further.
Mhm.
One of the best pieces of, honestly, it was criticism, but I was delighted nonetheless, is there was a podcast that did like a read along of the book. And they basically started the podcast by saying, we don't really have a lot to talk about with this book. And then they proceeded for an hour to have a lot to talk about with the book. And a lot of it focused on like kind of the deeper aspects of things. So like by the end, they were like, oh, I guess we did have a lot to talk about with it. Like, so yeah, that was like very,
Yeah.
I felt very good about that when people
Yeah.
can question things.
Well, it's also just done in a way that's very accessible, which is quite nice. But yeah, sorry, Steve, go on.
That's what we look for mostly is we like, our slogans read outside the box. We want people to kind of break out of their usual tastes and their comfort zone and stuff and try something a little bit new in terms of genre or content or something. And sometimes that's a swing and a miss. Some people just really would not like it. But I guess if they're subscribed to your paper quest, hopefully they're going in with the anticipation that they'll be challenged a little and that they might find something that they really love. So it warms my heart to hear stuff like that as well. Now, I was seeing in the upper right corner here that we've got 6.5 minutes left. So I want to get this one in because we touched on it earlier. The TV show, Lucifer, I would just like to hear briefly your thoughts and feelings on it because I have quite intense feelings about it.
I have to be honest. I have not watched the show.
Right, cool. Don't. Right. So I don't know if you ever I don't know if you've ever seen 30 Rock, but there's a running joke in it where like the TV executives will have something like a TV show where God comes down to Earth. What does he do? He helps a detective solve crimes in New York because that's the only TV show that they know how to write. And then Lucifer comes to Earth and helps a detective solve crimes in New York. And I mind when I saw it, I went, God, I'm so disappointed because I love fiction. I love fictional Lucifers. And I was so upset at it. But I wondered if you'd read it and what you thought about it, and we could have a good moan about it for a while. But that's quite all right.
I've got a quick follow-up question. Sorry, no, Ben, if you have any response, please say
I
it.
was just going to say that so like it's a trope is
Yeah,
supernatural figure assists detective in solving crimes. It's just a supernatural Agatha Christie or Murder She Wrote or whatever,
yeah,
like So yeah,
Formula.
I'm with you.
So something I wanted to ask was about Rob. Was Rob a difficult character, a fun character? How was that to actually write someone who was kind of off the deep end, for lack of a better word?
I think he was fun. I think he was, yeah. I mean, I don't think there was anything particularly difficult about writing Rob. I mean, Rob's got a lot of issues, and in the end, it's Rob's problem is a thirst for power. It isn't knowledge. It isn't, he people approach their spiritual practice for any number of reasons. And you had three people plus Nick who were doing this ritual in a graveyard to summon the devil. And I imagined that each of them, because we've got Rob, we've got Amy, and we've got Derek, who's unfortunately just mostly a punching bag in the first book. Um, and like they're doing it for very different reasons. Amy is a deeply spiritual person and was, for whatever reason, bought into this concept. And but Rob, like from the get-go, when I wrote Rob, I knew that he was in it for this illusion of power. So yeah, I think he was a fun character to write. I don't want to spoil anything, but let's just say that you'll encounter Rob again. And one of the most, I think it's funny because it is a rewarding complaint, is that people will get into the second book and have a moment of no. And then like by the end, I've won them back in that like no one, like by the end of the book, no one likes Rob. You're not supposed to like Rob.
Right.
Uh and let's just say Rob has a over the series, Rob has a very interesting arc.
Well, I think it's one of the things that really stood out to me about Rob, and we've only got like 3 minutes left, so I'll breeze through this real fast, is that I liked how it Lucifer could tell. Like if you're being disingenuous about your faith or about who you believe in and like your intentions, he could tell. Which leads me to then take a step back and be like, well, that probably means God can tell as well. And just kind of having that self-awareness as well. So it was really interesting to see that perspective of, oh yeah, he's in it for the wrong reasons. Even if he's supporting the devil, I don't want his support. Like I still care about the people who are looking at me. So
I
like
like that.
reputation and this and that, I found it really interesting. But we do have two minutes left. So I wanted to ask you, if people liked My Boss is the Devil, obviously, what should they read next? If people want to follow up with everything that you're working on, what's the best way they can get a hold of you? What's the best way they can follow up with everything?
Sure. I'm on most social medias. The only one I'm not on is the platform formerly known as Twitter.
Okay.
You can find me at benschenkman.com. That's my website where all my books and stuff are posted. You can contact me there. If you liked My Boss is the Devil, you absolutely should read Dueling Shoulder Angels and then Too Many Gods in the Kitchen. Like, I'm not supposed to say this as an author, but like I mean, as we write books, the books we write should get better and better because
Yeah, yeah.
we're honing our practice. And books two and three are objectively better than book one. So I think they should definitely check those out.
I mean, there's also a level of like world building that you don't
Mhm.
get. So, but
In that case, could I finish off with a quick zinger?
yeah.
Favorite fictional portrayal of the devil that isn't in your own books? Go.
It's Al Pacino in Devil's Advocate. He really is my favorite fictional portrayal of the devil.
That film also contains my least favorite Texan accent by an actor
Oh,
in
it's
Keanu Reeves.
terrible. It's absolutely awful. Yes.
But Al Pacino saves it, man. I think
Uh,
I'd either go with Constantine. Is it? Oh, what's his name? I can't remember his name now. Swedish actor Peter Stormare, however you pronounce it.
oh,
He's
he's
great.
fantastic.
He's phenomenal. So fun and kind of like a little bit Broadway and everything, but really
Mhm.
sinister at the same. Yeah, I love that. Anyway, we're almost out of time, so we'll
Yeah.
leave it.
We've got 20 seconds left. So if you manage to make it the entire way and you forgot, it was My Boss is the Devil. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us. And we're really looking forward to the sequel and everything else that's to come.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
man.
Let's see.